In our final lecture for the week, we'll be looking at the last stage of the writing process, revision and editing. We'll be considering the peer review process we'll use during the course, the dangers of premature editing, diction, and spelling. By now, you will have been exploring our weekly course routine in Moodle, and is designed to use the writing process to develop essays. It includes 3 process stages: pre-writing, drafting, and revision. You'll notice that the 3rd section in Moodle is called Review and Revise. And revise is obviously the verb form of revision. And think of it this way: revision. This is where we return to a draft to re-see it. When we see a text from the inside, for example, reading our own text, we see and hear our intentions, and that leads us to miss gaps between intentions and the actual text. Reading our own text after time goes by, we forget our intentions and see and hear the actual text. A great help in doing this is peer review. This is where you find someone else who can read your text without any idea of intentions and give you feedback. Weeks 1 to 4 will be using the feedback forum to do this. Before the end of the week, post your draft for the week. Read classmates' drafts and post feedback within 48 hours. Review feedback on your essay, and then in week 5, you'll be selecting one essay from the earlier weeks to revise for your formal essay. Now, when we talk about revision, we inevitably discuss editing, and there's a problem with that. Many people fret way too early about errors. Remember, drafting is composing a formal text, and a formal text we think of as meticulously edited sentences. Well, editing, therefore, leads to anxiety. And if we do this too early, we'll be worrying so much about grammar and spelling while actually composing text that we experience writer's block. The goal is to express a thought in a sentence, and if we're fretting over grammar, we just can't even finish a sentence. What's the right time for editing? Well, that will vary with the writer, but let's answer it this way. It's time to edit when you can do it without anxiety, self-judgment, or blockage, without fretting over grammar theory. Now, experienced writers develop the ability to edit while they're writing, and they do so without fretting. And if you can do that, that's great. But many inexperienced or student writers are subject to anxiety, and they're prone to writer's block if they start editing while composing. Never fret about editing while you're composing text. Don't agonize over sentences, fighting for perfect expression. Just write. Let it flow. Come back to editing later if necessary. We must also beware of the cultural trap of editing. Standards appropriate for one cultural context are sometimes mistaken as universal standards. For example, standard written English is often enforced and learned as an absolute universal standard, which should be in operation everywhere. So a student gets a paperback and in red pen it says, "This is wrong!" Well, the writer can be crippled by internalizing the judgment, and the writer's faith in communication instincts can be broken. Let's recall the deal that we made in our last lecture. We're going to affirm your communication instincts as a resource to draw on. Sometimes you'll depart from standard written English standards, and these departures may actually be correct in some other context. You do need to adapt to standard written English standards in order to write successfully in college, but it's a matter of adaptation. So let's make an assumption. First of all, most students in the course are speakers of English. Well, what does that mean? It means they're already experts in English grammar. What? Experts? Well, we're talking about practical expertise. A speaker of English can understand, can speak, and can write in English effectively, and you need grammar to do that. So, we're going to assume that course students are capable of composing sound text, catching many errors, and correcting them without resorting to grammar theory. Grammar theory has a limited value. From this assumption flows a recipe for effective composition and editing. Trust your instincts. Write freely without editing worries. Compose a draft, but then read it aloud, every word. Listen for glitches. You will catch most of them. Fix as many as you can. Again, that will be most of them. But there may be some glitchy spots that confuse you, where you're not really sure what to do. That's the time to turn to resources. Fagley, our lectures, dictionaries, the OWL, etc. Turn to grammar theory only when your instincts can't do the job. Believe it or not, we will be looking at a tiny fraction of the existing body of grammar theory. But we will select for each of our weeks a theme that has to do with one of the things that students struggle with. And we'll look at 3 aspects of editing: writing style, correcting departures from standard written English, grammar, punctuation, mechanics, and formatting, and English as second language issues. For week 1, our stylistic concern will be diction. That is to say, the choice we make of the word that will express our idea. We'll be considering academic precision and correctness, choosing the word that actually says what we want to say. And of course, related to this is the editing theme of spelling. As we think about choosing the right word, consider our audience. An academic audience places a very high value on precision, being exact, far more so than in daily life. Consider this non-academic expression. Concern for healthcare stood out like a sore thumb in the polling data. Does that make sense? Well, sure, at a conversational level, but academic audiences expect precision and quantification that is not met by this cliche. Well, how much concern? What did the data say? Stood out like a sore thumb? You've heard that expression. It's a cliche, a widely used stock expression, often a dead metaphor. There's a reference to a thumb, but we don't really think about an actual thumb there. It's easily understood to a point, but it's almost always precise by academic standards. Clichés are fine in first drafts as you're trying to get your ideas down, write freely and naturally. But watch for them at the revisioning stage. Adapt the cliché to academic standards. So that sentence can be rewritten like this. Over 58% of the respondents polled expressed concern for healthcare. That is an academic sentence. This is what Fagley is referring to when he talks about levels of formality in his chapter on finding the right words. Colloquialisms. These are informal, conversational expressions from language. Slang. Informal language linked to a specific group, and it's subject to rapid obsolescence, as any parent knows when attempting to use teen speak. Now, the idea here is that colloquialism, slang, and cliches are not adequate to achieve academic levels of precision. In section 30C, Fagley talks about precise, specific language. First, he talks about vague and imprecise writing. But then he talks about choosing the wrong word or phrase. He provides a table with often confused words. For example, continuously versus continually, or respectfully versus respectively. These are often homonyms, words or phrases that sound alike but have different meaning. Affect versus effect, course versus course, past versus past, where, whether, lose, lose. Which are the words or phrases from the table that you struggle with? At the back of the book, Fagley includes a glossary with 2 lists, grammatical terms, and then, perhaps more important, common errors of usage. It's important that you ask yourself some questions of self-assessment. How sure are you of these pairings, when to say affect and when to say effect? How much time should you spend reviewing the usage lists? This is a great reference source to turn to when you're not sure about a word or phrase. Then, in chapter 45, Fagley touches on spelling. Spelling English is hard. There are many ways to spell a sound. There are patterns with many exceptions. There are irregular forms, etc. Then there's the question of which English. British English, which is taught in England and many ex-colonies around the world, for example in Africa or the Asian subcontinent. British English spells words like this: labor, spectre, analyze, eon, and gray. American English uses labor, spectre, analyze, eon, and gray, but spells them differently. The good news is that e-tools on spelling help a great deal. We have on the web e-dictionaries, and Fagley explains how to use Google to check spelling. Software spell checkers are an enormous help in a word processor, a website box, etc. Now, Fagley warns that we have to be aware of the limitations of these tools. For example, a word can be marked if it's not in the e-dictionary. I can add it later, however. On the other hand, a word is not marked if it is there. So, for example, if I say where and I mean where, it's not marked if it's wrong. Still, e-spell checkers are far from useless. They're usually, not always, correct in flagging a spelling glitch. And they're easy to use. Just right-click and select the right word. They're always there to help. Want to feel foolish? Turn in a text with spelling glitches marked by the spell checker, which could have been so easily corrected, an unforced error. Okay, I think that's enough for the first week. We've had a lot to do, introducing things and so forth. Let me end with one key piece of advice for the week. Be patient with yourself. Successful writing grows via process. Don't demand it instantly. Patiently work through the process. Use pre-writing to generate material and plan your structure. Draft freely and without fretting, trusting your instincts. Then open yourself to feedback. The best texts emerge from revision.